Hi, I'm Anna Denton-Jones, and in today's session, firstly, I want to wish everybody Happy New Year because this is the first video of 2022, but also to talk about a situation where employees might have more than one job on the go. So I'm thinking of the employee who's got a side hustle, maybe a hobby that they've pursued outside of work, that maybe grows into something a bit more. They might start selling their services or selling a product, and that might grow into something where it starts to conflict with the employer's interests. Equally, I'm talking about a situation where an employee may be overemployed and they've deliberately commenced employment with somebody else alongside working for you. Now, that may start relatively innocently, perhaps where somebody's hedging their bets. Maybe they're on garden leave with their old employer and they start working for the new employer at the same time, even though technically they shouldn't. And maybe they're hedging their bets and dipping their toes in the water with the new employer before they hand their notice in with the old employer. There are websites devoted to advising employees how to do this. It's much more common in America than it is here. But there are these websites that share tips of the trade, if you like, to encourage people how they may avoid getting caught doing this. So it is worth being aware of. And the big challenge for employers is how you catch people at it, particularly when we're trying to encourage, in these days of perhaps more remote working and home working, a culture of trust where we're not perhaps monitoring everybody every second of the day. So risks of this undoubtedly include the employee just burning the candle at both ends and being tired, making mistakes, productivity obviously being a challenge. But it can be more than that. They might be sharing your confidential information. Obviously, there's productivity concerns, but there may be a wider conflict of interest, not only in terms of what they're doing with their time and energy, but also in terms of your business interests and the other employer's business interests, as well as the risk of them perhaps deciding long term to leave you and go and work for the other employer, in which case they may start actually taking your staff with them. So what are the things that employers can do on a practical level to guard against this? Well, number one, making your place to work be the place everyone wants to be in terms of engagement and culture is really important, because if people are happy, then they're going to be less inclined to do this sort of thing. But from a contractual perspective, we've got the implied duty of good faith or fidelity in the contracts of employment at all times. So really an employee should not be doing anything that detracts them from that. But in express contractual terms, we can be setting out that we expect the whole of somebody's time and attention, and that they shouldn't be involved in outside interests. And sometimes I think those of us in HR, us lawyers, we tend to use language where we all know what we're talking about, but we don't necessarily make it express to the employees what that means, and that outside interests isn't just about them owning another company, for example. It is about you not working for another employer. If we've got those sorts of things in our contracts, and maybe in a home working policy, we might want to talk a little bit more about these things, then we're going to have the foundations in place if we do need to do an investigation, if we do need to discipline somebody and potentially dismiss them for their conduct. The other thing, of course, we can be doing in our contracts is thinking about restrictive covenants in terms of the staff poaching example, and protecting that. When it comes to the sort of side hustle type of scenario, often employers don't mind the employee having a hobby outside and doing something that may be good for their well-being. But there's always the risk of that growing into something more that then starts to cause a conflict. So it may be useful to have in your contractual clauses, in your policies, that any of those sorts of things do need to be put past a manager, because it then gives the manager the ability to say, I've got no problem with you setting up your little bakery business and selling product on a weekend, as long as it doesn't start to affect your working for us and the attention that you give your job. So if at some point in the future there is that conflict, productivity starts to be affected, or you believe the employee isn't devoting their working hours to you and are perhaps being diverted to something else, then again, you've got the foundations to go back and say, look, we said we didn't have a problem with this, but now it's becoming an issue. Otherwise, the employee turns around and says, well, I told you 5 years ago and you've never told me I couldn't do it. That's probably enough for today. If anyone's got any questions, please do contact me. It's adenton@refreshinglawltd.co.uk. Thank you very much.